Welcome to Project HeadCanon. If you're watching this, it means my grand canonical playthrough of Knights of the Old Republic 2 and my corresponding edits to the wiki are finally complete. There's a link somewhere nearby if you want to watch the playthrough. It's a pretty long playlist, totaling just under 24 hours, but I hope it strikes a good balance between being a comprehensive playthrough of the game and a compelling story in its own right. I've already made a content crosshair video for the game itself, but this video will serve as a content crosshair for my specific playthrough of the game, as well as a more general retrospective on my experiences playing the game. We'll go pretty quickly here. T3M4 repairs the damaged Ebon Hawk and flies it to Paragus. The Jedi Exile wakes up, meets Kreia, Atton Rand, and T3M4, fights a bunch of mining droids and an HK-50 assassin droid, and escapes a Sith ambush. The crew flies to Telos, gets arrested, finds the Ebon Hawk stolen, helps some Ithorians, meets Bao-Dur, and tracks the Ebon Hawk to a hidden Jedi enclave run by Atris. The crew leaves to find the remaining Jedi Masters, with Brianna along for the ride. On Nar Shaddaa, the Exile meets Visas Mar and does a bunch of humanitarian work to attract the attention of the Exchange. She gets captured by the Exchange boss called Goto, but Mira shows up and helps her to escape, after a quick chat with Zez-Kai-El, taking the droid G0T0, aka Goto, with them. The Exile reactivates HK-47 and heads to Dantooine, where she meets Mikal, chats with Vrook, and helps the locals defend their home from a group of Exchange-backed mercenaries. Then she crash lands on Duxon, where she meets Canderous Ordo and earns a ride to Onderon, where she is eventually forced to flee by a Sith-backed political faction. She heads to Korriban, escapes another Sith ambush, investigates a spooky cave, and heads back to Duxon. 3 of her companions defeat a temple full of Sith, while she ends the civil war on Onderon and chats with Kavar. And then the twist. Kreia reveals herself to be evil, kills the surviving Jedi Masters, and the Exile follows her to Telos, where she and Brianna defeat Atris, who had fallen to the dark side. HK-47 takes over the factory that had been building the HK-50 droids the Exile had frequently encountered, while the Exile defends Telos from the Sith and kills Darth Nihilus. Finally, the Exile flies to Malachor 5. Her companions get captured, but she fights her way through the Sith, rescuing them. She overcomes Darth Sion to face and finally defeat Kreia, then flies away with her crew as the planet is destroyed behind her. Roll credits. This will be kind of meta, since I'm technically analyzing a work that I had a big hand in creating. I thought very carefully about every single decision and dialogue choice, and I've made a page on the wiki to record my notes on certain points I found worth mentioning, some of which I will discuss here. First, a word about the planet order. I think the one I chose makes the most sense for a few reasons. First, gameplay-wise, it gives the most new companions the fastest, and gets them started on their Jedi training sooner. Second, from a story perspective, it lets the tension and scope of conflict ramp up from planet to planet, with the Sith staying in the background until the end. And third, from an in-universe perspective, Atton recommends Nar Shaddaa several times early on, then Zez-Kai-El mentions the Enclave on Dantooine. That leaves Onderon and Korriban, and any sane person would prefer the former first. The rest of the choices are forced. For the companion story arcs, I front-loaded and stuffed most of their conversations in between the planets, rather than interspersing them throughout the run. That way, they wouldn't drag down the faster pacing later on in the story. It also let me start their Jedi training pretty early on, which I think is important, since they're the ones who rebuilt the Jedi Order after the game, and deserved more than like a week's training in the Force to do so. It also has obvious gameplay benefits, and I admit I kind of like the idea of the Exile trying to run impromptu Jedi classes on the Ebon Hawk, with a bunch of distrustful and dysfunctional weirdos, all under the bemused non-gaze of Kreia. It's like Cobra Kai, but in space. There are a few other cool details to talk about. For example, here, in the Jek-Jek-Tar, that Gand shooting a blaster rifle from the corner is actually Osluk. I deliberately didn't kill him here, as being anonymously wiped out by the Exile seems too ignominious a death for such a famous figure. Instead, he'll be forever known as the Gand who fought the Jedi Exile and survived. On Korriban, I thought for a while about doing the cave bit before doing the Sith Academy bit, since it would make a bit more sense to flee Korriban outright after encountering a literally invincible Darth Sion. But the game seems to strongly prefer going to the Academy first, so I stuck with that order. The exact timeline of events after returning to Duxon from Korriban is a bit difficult to parse. It's never explained directly, but I'm pretty sure the ritual the Sith were conducting in Freedon Nad's tomb is what was allowing them to control all the beasts on Onderon. That would mean the Sith Lords breaking the ritual coincided with the Sith troopers breaching the throne room suddenly losing control of the Drexel larva. I thought about cutting between the two scenes in the playthrough to make that more clear, but it proved more trouble than it was worth. Knights of the Old Republic 2 has already been declared canon, and that judgment remains. For the purposes of Project HeadCanon, the playthrough series itself should be treated as the canonical version of events. But there was still a lot of work to do, since this run has a few key differences from the canon version of KotOR II as it appears on Wikipedia. Obviously, things like the color of the Exiles' lightsabers, Viridian then Silver, Brianna being an actual party member, and the Order of Planets, but that's just the beginning. Notably, I used version 1.8.6 of the Restored Content mod, which is, in my opinion, essential for anyone wishing to get a full experience out of this game. However, because the restored content never appeared in the official published version of the game, it all falls under cut content on Wikipedia. I had to copy and paste a lot of material from the behind-the-scenes sections of Wikipedia articles to their Project HeadCanon equivalents, and even recreate a few articles that I had deleted during the early setup of the wiki. A bit annoying, but it had to be done sometime. I made a few distinctly non-light-sided choices during the run, including killing Sakwesh, intimidating Garrity, letting Talia kill Vaklu, and making a few decidedly neutral or dark-sided remarks in some conversations. Wikipedia generally assumes that the player makes the most light-sided choices available, so I did have to make some edits to address those instances too. Because I also used a bunch of high-definition graphical mods, my playthrough ended up having a few still frames that are basically better versions of images already on the wiki. Additionally, thanks to the Canonical Jedi Exile mod, we can add a few screenshots featuring the Exile herself. This will be an ongoing process, but definitely one that's worth doing in the long run. I made a deliberate choice not to feature the Jedi Exile's name, instead using the in-game name Exile. It might seem a bit off that she refers to herself by that name occasionally in the playthrough, but I can see it making some sense in-universe. If she was a famous general during the Mandalorian Wars, it would make sense to abandon her name and travel incognito, and the fact of her exile was central to her identity at the beginning of the story. So, exile she is, for now. In the entire series, there's really only one thing that I think I actually messed up, and that's a brief bit of unique dialogue that Bao-Dur has with Tien Tub, the droid merchant on Nar Shaddaa. In the series, I didn't bring Bao-Dur, so those lines were skipped. I'll treat it as canonical that Bao-Dur and he did in fact recognize each other, contrary to what's in the video. There's one additional ruling I'd like to make, and that's to declare that Kreia is in fact Aaron Kay, Brianna's mother. Both were said to have been Jedi historians who trained Revan, were exiled from the Jedi Order, and presumed dead at Malachor. The only difference seems to be the reasoning for their exile. For Kay, it was her affair with Usanis, and for Kreia, it was her terrible track record as a teacher. For our purposes, it was both. She was already a problematic teacher, and the affair was just the straw that broke the Bantha's back. So, there. Aaron Kay was exiled from the Jedi Order and became Darth Traya, who was exiled from the Sith and became Kreia. I'll keep Kreia as the title of her article on the wiki, since that's what she's known as for most of the game. As I mentioned in the first Content Crosshair video for KotOR II, this game has far-reaching influences on the rest of Star Wars. Its thematic implications ripple outwards, almost like an echo. Anyway, so, theme. What is this story about? In my view, it's about healing. The Exile is a fundamentally broken person at the start, as are all of her companions. Atton eventually forgives himself, Bao-Dur redeems himself, Brianna escapes a rigid belief system, Mikal rediscovers his roots, Mira embraces the world around her, Visas achieves an act of sacrifice without self-destruction, HK-47 is literally and physically reassembled, Goto's purpose is fulfilled, T3-M4's memory is repaired, and Kreia, finally gets some peace and quiet. But how does the Exile gradually heal herself? By helping others. A very optimistic theme for an otherwise dark and moody game, and quite a beautiful juxtaposition in my opinion. Here's the problem. In order to help others in the way the Exile did, you have to truly care about them, dare I say love them. I posit that nobody could have healed the galaxy as the Exile did, while remaining stoic and detached from it like the old Jedi Masters in the game. It was not her affinity for the Force, but her ability to form connections with others that made the Exile's actions possible. Despite her darker intentions, that is Krea's thesis as well. Forming real human relationships is only possible when one strips away the Force, thereby removing its supersession of free will and its temptation to seek personal power at the expense of others. In the moral framework of Jedi and Sith, you can't be Force-sensitive and be a person. Only 2 people in all of Star Wars are known to have consciously forged a third path, embracing their humanity and their love for others while still remaining in touch with the Force: the Jedi Exile and Luke Skywalker. And that right there is the single gaping plot hole left by this playthrough. Not a logical or factual one, but a wound in the thematic fabric of Star Wars. In order for Luke Skywalker's story and the prequel trilogy to have any meaning at all, this game's lessons must be left unlearned. Indeed, the Jedi of the prequel era found themselves backed into the exact same logical contradiction almost 4,000 years later. Their overriding devotion to the Force and their subservience to the corrupt Republic left them out of touch while the galaxy suffered around them. Something must have happened to cause the Jedi Order to backslide into the same philosophical sand trap. And unfortunately, even including the Old Republic Revan novel, which I'll cover in its own video soon, Legends really doesn't have an answer. I have a plan to rectify that, but for now, the wound remains. And, much like the story of KotOR II, I'll end this video on that abrupt but hopeful note. This playthrough took quite a long time to finish, but I had a great deal of fun delving into the game's secrets and finding ways to optimize both gameplay and storytelling efficiency. Moreover, it was another thing I could chip away at concurrently with my other projects. For the next Content Crosshair video, we'll kick off a similar series, this one covering the game's legendary predecessor. Until then, may the Force be with you.